Just one comment on that in terms of paying more going forward. I think that my concern would be if consumers actually accept the statement that a smart grid equals reduced bills. I'm very concerned about that statement because I just, for me, that's just too simplistic. If I had a smart meter in my home, one of the things that would drive me is I want to know what it is that's actually costing me kilowatt hours, how much am I paying per kilowatt hour, and then what are the other taxes, et cetera, that make up my bill, so that I could actually feel comfortable that if I chose to turn my heat on 5 degrees warmer than my neighbor, and it costs me an extra $5 a month, that's my decision. But right now, when I look at my bill, really I look at an aggregate, right? I look at the total number of kilowatt hours I've used during that 28 to 30 day period, and then I look at a couple of line items, a line for taxes and the total amount. And then possibly on the back side of my bill, I look at a little bar chart that tells me what I used a year ago that same month. For me, I'd like to actually be a little bit more granular and figure out what it was that was driving the kilowatt hour usage.
We're all talking about the consumer's control, but what about the power company's control? Let's say it's really hot and everyone's running their air conditioner or something like that, and the load is just getting too powerful. Through the smart grid, can the power company say, oh, you don't really need it that cool in your house, we're going to up your temperature by maybe 1 or 2 degrees in everyone's household? I mean, control goes both ways.
Okay. So it's an excellent question. There have been some discussions in terms of a technology. Is it possible? Yes. The question that is occurring right now, and it's a very timely question, is if you as a consumer, residential consumer, say to the utility, optimize my consumption and my minimize my bill during the month, which means that I will give you the control to turn my air conditioner down those peak periods or other things. The question then becomes, is that something that's important for a consumer? And the question from our marketing and our pricing people is, if that were to happen, what's the return for the customer? So if you allow the utility to have that flexibility, just like 15 years ago we introduced that on the commercial side, normally what happens is there's some other conversation that occurs that says, if I allow you to do this, where's the return for me in terms of a lower price for your energy?
I think, I'm going to add one point. I think if you look at it, the utilities are able to do that now. They're able to basically phase out your load. For instance, what happens in the brownouts? In California, when the loads were high, the utilities were able to shut off power to selected areas at different times. So what the smart grid allows you to do is, it allows the utilities to shut down the power selectively to certain appliances, raise the temperatures and whatnot, so that they can manage it better. I think that's what we are trying to exchange. Instead of just shutting the load, sooner or later, we are going to have issues. If the load keeps going up, our generation capacity is not going up. So what will happen is, it will allow them to change. For instance, if they want to basically shut the power off on all the households but not the hospitals, they would not be able to do it otherwise. So now they have this fine-grained control, which actually helps us in the long run.
Just a very fundamental question. We're talking about all this communication between the grid and people's homes. Is that to be done on the existing internet as is now, or are you talking about a new infrastructure that would allow that communication that would be different from the internet?
I think that's one of the most interesting questions today. That's the big debate.
Okay.
I think if I look at the commercial side of things, companies like GE are pushing for a completely new infrastructure. In fact, what they want is that every electric pole in the whole United States should have 3 GE wireless transmitters. Why? Because they can sell it and they can make billions of dollars off of that. But that's the big question. There are several different ways in which you can transmit, communicate information. One is, wireless, going from pole to pole to pole. The other is using electric wires themselves. And the third is creating a network of, fiber optic cables for the world which rivals the internet. And there's a fourth option. That I think 93% of the households are internet capable today. Why not just take a small channel off of the current internet and dedicate it to the use of electricity suppliers and whatnot? So all of these options are being debated. In the long run, we are not going to have a single network which is ubiquitous, uniform network We'll have different ways of communicating information. For instance, it might be different in the cities, it might be completely different in the rural areas. So we will have a hybrid network which utilizes multiple different communication channels. Also, we might build redundant channels. And what happens if you have a fiber optic network that fails? We might have an alternate network which goes in electric wires. So that in case one fails, we have a low latency and low bandwidth network which is available for the entire. So the answer to that is not clear, but it will be a hybrid network of some kind.
Yeah, and that that topic is a pretty hot topic from a security standpoint. I mean, it's something that comes up quite frequency, and from a practical standpoint, if you have all these devices out in the field, how do you get a secure channel from someone's home all the way back to a control center? And you have to look at the risk-reward trade-offs for that too. But it is a real concern. And there's also concerns about if you have just a few big players that are creating these devices, what kind of vulnerabilities do the devices have? Is there a way to take a whole lot of them out all at once? Because from a control center standpoint, an individual's house gets taken out, that's not a big deal. But if a whole bunch of them get taken out all at the same time, now you have a problem. And so it is a real challenge. For the phaser measurement stuff that we're doing now, that's not going over the public intranet or the public internet. But the communications companies are getting dragged into the regulations too, and they all have some opinions about this stuff too.
So thanks for the segue. I just wanted to share with you in our Smart Technology Center in Liverpool, as Pradeep had mentioned, we're doing some of the testing here and these types of technologies. And I'll just give you a quick summary, and then if you have more questions, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. But these were exactly the concerns we were worried about or concerned about from a testing standpoint. We know that there are other utilities in the country that have decided to take smart grid, define it as primarily the meter, and go for full-scale deployment. We've seen some of the unfortunate circumstances that have occurred with that decision, especially on the West Coast. I work for a gentleman who is now going for a second PhD, first one in systems engineering, has a fantastic background in setting up standards and testing labs that he actually did when we were still in the nuclear generation business. And so one of the things that he always likes to say is, when technologists come in and sales reps come in, they will always tell you that their system works the best. Never seen anything like it, can't get anything better than it, better than sliced bread. And his approach is great, marvelous. Put it up on the bench, let's connect it and see how it works. And that was the approach that we took. From a communication standpoint, there was exactly the discussions about fiber, wireless, other technologies, hub mesh technologies. And one of the concerns that we had as a utility is that we knew for sure in our franchise territory, whatever technology we deployed, it would have to have the same reliability, the same repeatability across the territory. And with National Grid's territory, we serve some very rural communities and some very dense city areas. We also knew that there were likely to be some questions about whether or not wireless worked really well. If you were in a multi-family building, like a high-rise apartment building, you happen to have the apartment that was down in the basement and your friend had one up in the penthouse. So the question was, could we actually get the same level of communication speed on both of those locations? If not, we would have a problem sitting down with our regulators and actually moving that technology forward as a preferred technology. The other piece of it that's important from a policy standpoint, you start getting into third-party private suppliers of communications technology, and now you start to deal with very critical issues from a utility perspective. I'll give you an example. The Florida utility, they actually had contracted out some of their communications to another firm, didn't own it, actually had a service level agreement. When the storms came in, the service level agreement was such that, yes, in fact, they would get response. It's just that that provider didn't fully appreciate how important the response was for the utility. Long story short, the utility was fined for its bad response, not because it dropped the ball, so to speak, but because of the relationship between its reliability and the relationship that they had with the service level agreement with that third party provider was not clearly understood.
I wondered if somebody was going to mention the words kill switch, right? Which is part of the question that rolls into the authority that some in Congress have thought for the president to be able to shut down parts of the internet and order internet service providers, communication providers, and others. One of the big examples is the Hoover Dam, right? That somebody could infiltrate the Hoover Dam and open up the gates. Well, the Hoover Dam, thank goodness, isn't connected to the internet, so there's no control from the Hoover Dam that you could do that with. That's always my first response. Why is it even connected? I know why it's connected. Convenience, right? Because then the Hoover Dam operator at home supervisor can go on the internet and make sure the guys aren't sleeping. Wait, that's aircraft control towers. But you get the idea, right? So as I understand it, and I haven't confirmed, some nuclear facilities have some ability for engineers to use VPNs to access, control elements of. I don't like that. The convenience doesn't match the risk for me. So if we're going to do this, that needs to constantly be in people's mind. It can't just be cost benefit. Oh, this is a rural area, and to try to do wireless mesh would just be too expensive, and so we ought to just run over the cable internet that's run by Time Warner. No, I don't really want my electrical stuff going over the Time Warner lines. I really don't. I've dealt with them. So there's got to be some sort of trade-off beyond just simply traditional cost-benefit analysis that deals with the critical infrastructure that's there. It sounds like that's occurring, but we need to make sure it still does, and we need to make sure it goes to those people who are non-providers that are later integrated into the system to do things like help processing information and deal with aggregation of information and long-term issues.
So, talking about cost-benefit, I think you're bringing it right back to cost again. And, back to Ron's question back there about how much is it going to cost me? And we've talked about, this is a huge initiative of the Obama administration. And he threw a ton of money at this. And that was all stimulus money, our money. There is no other money floating around for this kind of activity after that stimulus money is all gone. And trying to raise our rates, we got to go through the Public Service Commission, we got to do all the other ratepayer kind of stuff. I'm not willing to pay for it. Why? To get my light shut off? I'm going to pay extra just to get my so that I can't operate my dryer when I want to? It makes it difficult to justify to implement this kind of technology. And the other aspect of it is, it's completely different from the internet. I mean, you cannot compare, people try to do this all the time. They compare the electric grid to the internet, especially when they talk about smart grid. We're going to try to do the same thing. We're going to try to build the same type of network. We're going to do a lot of the same stuff. Not happening, right? Because the utilities are regulated. There's government regulation that you got to go through. The internet wasn't that way to begin with. So comments related to those 2 points, cost and the regulation aspects in terms of how this was ever going to happen once the stimulus money goes away.
Well, I'm going to answer the second question first regarding the similarity of the internet with the smart grid network. If you look at the internet, it was created on there was certain premise behind it. For instance, there's an anonymity that people are going to stay hidden behind something else so that nobody else can know their identity. There were issues of freedom of speech which were embedded into the internet. But now with the smart grid, it's machines talking to machines. Do we really need freedom of speech with machines? I don't know the answer, but probably not, probably. But I'm sure there are privacy advocates which will say that, well, machines need to have the freedom. Yes, they do. Corporations do. Why not the machines? So I think we need to really rethink the fundamental on which the internet was based, because internet is not secure, and a lot of the reason is because of its flexibility, because of its anonymity, because of its non-traceability. Right now, you really can't trace a packet from point to point to point because legal regulation and so on and so forth. So we need to be able to redefine the protocols for the internet, and that's something that we're working on actually. We're trying to understand what protocols on the internet are useful, how they need to be changed, what restrictions we can put in to make it more secure. And the answer, as far as the money goes, utility.